Good ladies and gentlemen of Dallas, Texas. This morning he is a writer, he is a teacher, he is a lecturer. He was born in London, England before he became an American citizen. Greg McKeown is also a much sought after speaker for such companies as, and they're impressive, Apple, Google, Facebook, LinkedIn, Salesforce.com. And this morning, Greg adds EIA and Dallas, Texas to his impressive lists. It is impressive, Greg. His popular blogs for Harvard Business Review and LinkedIn's influencer group include, and get these titles, The Difference Between Successful and Very Successful People, Hire Slow, Fire Fast, The Unimportance of Practically Everything, and What Will You Create to Make the World Awesome? He holds an MBA from Stanford. I'm still trying to figure out what the tree stands for, but that's another thing. He was a collaborator on the Wall Street Journal bestseller called Multipliers, and also is the author of the New York Times bestseller on your table, Essentialism, the Disciplined Pursuit of Less. And wrap your head around a few of these chapter headings. Chapter 5, The Perks of Being Unavailable. Chapter 7, Play, Embrace the Wisdom of Your Inner Child. And of course, my personal favorite, Chapter 11, The Power of a Graceful No. No is not easy, especially for nonprofits like Executive in Action, because they, as we said, they require multiple yeses in order to make the wheels turn. But I think that path to a meaningful yes, or even a graceful yes, is often limited with multiple no's. For instance, after reviewing movies for 24 years and making movies for 4, I'm still learning the power of a graceful no, and here are 3 examples. I get these phone calls. Gary, my nephew is a former drug addict. He spent 10 years in prison for robbing banks, but was released early on good behavior after converting to Scientology and devoting the rest of his life to helping others get off drugs. He just wrote his first screenplay. Will you read it?
No!
Gary, I'm a lawyer, and I write screenplays in my spare time. I've written more than 10. I think my latest is the best. It's about a man who falls in love with a female robot because, well, he's incapable of having personal relationships with anyone. Will you read it?
No!
Gary, my 12-year-old son just made his first short film. It won Best in Show at his local competition. If I come by your office, will you watch it with me and let me know if my son has any talent? And then I ask, how many entries were there in the competition? Well, there were 2, but he won the entire thing. He was Best in Show.
N-O.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome from Menlo Park to Highland Park, with a brief stop in London, England, please welcome with a resounding yes, best-selling author, Greg McKeown. Have fun, Greg.
I love Texas. Yeah. And I love Dallas. Yeah. And I love Chris and Ashley, right? Yeah. And just for one more, I love Executives in Action. Yeah. And furthermore, while we're on the love train, I love that we started with a prayer today. A lot of places I go and speak, and we don't get to do that. Or that just isn't done. I guess we could do it. I guess people could choose to do it. And I just wonder, as we start today, if you won't hold in your hearts a prayer that you can hear something that touches you, that might last a lifetime. I'm going to do my best to have that prayer myself, because to me, it is hard to believe that you and I are here today in this moment by chance. Yeah, that's just hard for me to hold on to. In fact, when I think about the journey that I went to, and I bet you could have a story would be just as surprising as to how you got to be sitting here today. When I think about this for my life, it's really the most unusual story. It all started about 16 years ago, almost to the day, when I was staring at a piece of paper in my hands with a lot of scribbles and different answers to it, to a single question. And the question at the top of the piece of paper was, what would you do if you could do anything, but not everything? So 20 minutes of brainstorming on that question. And what I noticed when I looked down at the answers was that law school was not on the list. Any lawyers in the room? Nobody putting their hand up for that, I see. And the problem for me was that I was at law school. And what do you do? Well, somebody said drop out. That's easier said than done, isn't it? Maybe some of the lawyers in the room wish they had. So I was visiting the US, visiting Sean, who's here with me today. He'd sent me tickets to come to his wedding, and so this is how I was away from England, with a bit of space to look and reflect on the direction of my life, not just so busy living it, you know? In fact, somebody once said to me, I was asking them some question, they said, "Oh, Greg, I'm too busy living to think about life." Too busy living to think about life. But sometimes it happens. And so there I was wondering what to do. And I thought, finally, I better call my parents. I had to quit law school, you know. Now, what would you say to your son after all that time and all that money and all that effort to get into law school, and now you want out? So I called the 15-digit number back to Leeds, England, and my mother answers, fortunately. And she listens, and then she finally says, "I think you better talk to Dad." But he comes on the phone. Now, what does he say? Now, incidentally, let me tell you what he had told me before. This was the message. Keep your options open. Go to law school and keep your options open, right? Never mind that I didn't know what I wanted to do next, just keep your options open. This is a fundamental overvaluing of optionality. This is what is in my mind. So then he listens too, which is not entirely like him. And then at the end he says this, you know, because all Englishmen quote Shakespeare over tea and crumpets for breakfast, you know. He pulls out, he says, "You know what we've always told you, and you know what's in my mind, right? Keep your options." And he says, "You know what we've always told you, to thine own self be true." Now, he's never said that to me in his whole life. But he pulls it out in this moment, you know, he's quoting Hamlet, Polonius, to his son at a key moment in his life. I mean, I don't know how he pulled that out, but somehow he did in this moment. And then he adds, and this is verbatim, he says, this is how I record anyway, he says, "Look, just do what is right and let the consequence follow." Now that is a fundamentally different perspective than keep your options open. I'll just tell you that for free. And this was the beginning. And even in that story, there's a seed of everything that's followed, because what was on that piece of paper was to teach and to write. And particularly what was on that piece of paper was a question. This was the question. And I've asked this question now obsessively for the last 16 years. Absolutely constantly. And here's the question. I had 16 years, and you will have 16 seconds to answer. The question only seems fair. The question is, why is it that otherwise successful people and companies don't break through to the next level of contribution? That's it. Simple question. I'll say it one more time so you can think about it. I actually want your answers. Why is it that otherwise successful people and companies don't break through to the next level of contribution? Now, as you're thinking about that, let me put that into context, and then I really do want answers. I'm giving you warning so we don't have those awkward pauses. So here's the context. If you and I were to have a race right now, go outside, go and have a race on the green, and you won, which you would, and so you win by 10 yards, let's say, and then we have a second race, starting where we finished the first race. So you're 10 yards ahead at the beginning, right? What are the chances you'll win the second race? Pretty good. I mean, I would put my money on you again. And what if we did a third race? Same idea. Now you're 30 yards ahead at the beginning. Isn't it? It's inevitable, isn't it? You'd win again. 100%. And yet what we notice in human systems, whether at the individual or organizational level, is that is not what happens. So that's a curiosity. And my question is now to you is why. Why doesn't it happen? Why don't successful people in companies automatically become very successful and make an even higher contribution? All right, now let's have your answers. I give you plenty. Brilliant answers. Who said that? Lots of folks. You've read ahead. That's right. Well, that's an answer. What about some more? What do you really think? Yeah. But you don't have to give me the answers you think I want. Distracted is what you said. This is good. That's a good answer. What do you say? Innovation. What does that mean? Well, I know what innovation means, but so maybe the race changes. You were sprinting at first, but then maybe we went to cross country, but you're still running it like a sprint. The environment changed. Good. Thought back here. If the goal is achieved, the purpose is lost. That sounds profound. And I'm trying to understand it. Okay, so what would that mean? So you win and then the purpose is lost. What does that mean? What would you do next? Oh yeah, okay, so it's not interesting anymore. You've beaten me enough times in this race, you don't care. Let the Englishman win one. I'm all in favor of this at any time. Good, more. Yeah. That was a bit presumptuous. Okay, so it's like going to the next level up. You know, you're good at the local level, but then you go to the state level and suddenly somebody's there to clean your clock. Okay, so that's interesting. The competition gets stronger. Good. Fear what? Fear of what? Why would we fear winning? Yeah, so we're successful now. We don't want to try something that would mess with that, because then we could fail. And we do fear failure because we enjoy success more, and we don't want everyone to go, oh, well, you know. So they were good at this, but no more. Good, I like it. Good. Spread too thin while you're running. I just saw, for some random reason, just yesterday, like the world's fastest runner juggler. Did you see this just yesterday? Where did I see this? On some commercial someplace. So this is an interesting moment in time. This was meant to be, this moment. You wanted to give it. I appreciate that ever so much. Okay, another thought here. You don't mean me. It wasn't personal. Distracted by your own big ego. Yeah, because maybe, and Bill Gates said it this way. He said success is a very poor teacher, because it teaches us that we can't be wrong. Sometimes what we learn from success is that we did it. And so then we think I can do anything, because I am the reason we're successful, so I can take on any issue, any number of issues, and I'll still be successful, because it's me. There's a hubris that can set in. You know, these are all, how do I think of the answer? And the answer that most surprised me was one hidden in plain sight. So the thing that keeps successful people and companies from breaking through to the next level is success. Yeah. Now, how is that possible? Well, I noticed it, or at least named it, working with Silicon Valley companies. What I noticed was that when they were focused on the right few things at the right time, they were able to break through to the next level. And they had tremendous momentum, alignment as a team. This is what we're doing, and we're going to break through to the next level. But as they then became successful, they were consumed with options and opportunities. And those, of course, sound like the right problem to have. And that's true, but they do, in fact, turn out to be a problem if and when it leads to what Jim Collins called the undisciplined pursuit of more. Those words to sink in, unpack that for a minute. What examples can you think of, individuals or in companies, of people that have fallen prey to the undisciplined pursuit of more? Lance Armstrong, Brian Williams. I was there with him that day. And there was no shooting. No, just kidding. Yeah, Brian Williams, this is terrible, isn't it? Terrible. tell that story. He doesn't need to tell that story. No one needed to hear that story. And his whole career down, that's a good example. That's timely and painful. More. What examples can you think of? The undisciplined pursuit of more. Nixon. Bernie Madoff, yeah. That was a very undisciplined pursuit of a lot more. Enron. How is it possible? Amazing. These are all examples of people that could already have been successful, but somehow pursued something in an undisciplined way. Even, we might say it, an undiscipled. Discipline and disciple comes from the same root word. Undiscipled way, an undisciplined way. Let go of their center, let go of what was essential, and fell off the cliff. Undisciplined pursuit. There's examples all over the place. But one of the examples I came across was an individual. This is a true story of an executive who was working in one company, doing award-winning work. And then the whole company got purchased by a larger, more bureaucratic firm. And as he goes into the new company, he says, well, I want to be a good citizen. I want to be a good team player. And what does that mean? It means that you say yes to everyone without really thinking about it. At least that's what he thought. And that meant that, if he's invited to a meeting, he says yes. I don't want to be unfriendly about it, so you've got to say yes. If there's an email chain and he's included on it, then he wants to make a comment. If there's a conference call, he wants to be on it too. He wants to show, I'm here to be part of you, to be with you, and so on. And this is what the strategy gives him. His stress is just going up. Right? Can you relate? At exactly the same time, as if this isn't bad enough, as the quality of his work is going down. Can you relate? That's a gap that caused him a lot of pain. Right? He starts, what is the point? I am just being pulled all over the time. And he almost quits the company. But then somebody internally at the company says to him, no, look, what you need to do, you need to retire in your role. Which is a little bit different than saying, quit, stay, and don't tell anybody. Are we? Occasionally we've worked with people like that, and that's no fun at all. No, he says retire in role. What does it mean? It means maybe take on the role almost of a consultant within your role right now. So that you're thinking differently. You're not just saying, well, I say yes to everything because it's a hierarchy and I have to. I'm just going to think, where can I actually produce the greatest value? What can I actually do that might increase my value 10x of what I'm normally doing? And suddenly, with that question, you don't say yes to everything. In fact, you start to say no to quite a lot. In pursuit, not for the sake of it. This isn't about saying no for the sake of it. I didn't write a book, incidentally, called Noism. That's an important distinction. This is about essentialism. It's about what is really the very best use of you and of your time and energy and your resources. Well, so this is what he did. He started being more selective. What happened for him? What happened? A few months later, got fired. He didn't get fired. But it would change the tenor of our conversation if, in fact, that is what had happened. So here's what happened. First of all, at home, he said, I got my life back. He said, I negotiated with my team that every night at a certain time my phone would go off for a few hours. And I would have dinner with my wife. And then I would go to the gym. And I would just have some space. And that meant that when he got into work, he was refreshed and focused and able to discern better what was vital versus what was trivial. And that meant that by the end of that year, his performance evaluation ratings went up. And he ended that year with one of the largest bonuses of his whole career. What he learned from it was simple. If you simply say yes to everyone and everything without really thinking about it, you cannot be utilized at your highest point of contribution. That's it. But what about you? All right, snap for these. Have you ever found yourself stretched too thin at work or at home? Snap for that. We got some people doing double, almost a dance, like every day, that's my life. How about this? Have you ever found yourself being busy but not productive? How about that? Have you ever found yourself saying yes just to please? Or to appease? Or just to avoid trouble? Have you ever found that your email inbox gets longer by the end of the day than it is at the beginning? Or your to-do list longer at the end of the day than it was at the beginning? I mean, you can't carry on indefinitely this way. Just as an aside, I once made a list of everything that was on my mind, right? Just everything. And I think it got to about 400, right? I was about done by then. And then I thought, okay, what I'm going to do is every day when I make a soft commitment of some kind, I'm going to add that to the list. And when I complete something, I'm going to cut it off. And what happened to my list? It got longer. That is a fundamental problem. I mean, you just carry that forward for the rest of your life, and what happens to your stress? And what happens to your quality of work? Now, this is a strategic error that we're talking about. So the question is, as the CEO of your life, why are you allocating resources in such a way that you are stretched too thin at work or at home? Why? Oh, that's the question. Why? Actually want answers, you know. Why? This is not a trivial question. Why is it that otherwise really smart, driven, successful people would find themselves stretched too thin at work or at home? What's the cause of this? You haven't assessed what's truly important. Yeah, everything seems important. Everything's a priority. Yeah? Okay, let's riff on that, and then I'm going to come back, so you just get ready for this, right? Why? Why, as the CEO of your own life, you find yourself allocating resources in this way? So this idea of everything being a priority is pretty interesting to me. A little language lesson for a second. Right? So the word priority came into the English language in the 1400s. You know this? 1400. What did it mean? What do you think it means? Have a guess. The most important thing. No, one thing prior. The prior thing. The prior thing, right? One thing. The very most important thing. One. That's very sensible, isn't it? And very sensibly, the word priority stayed singular for the next 500 years. So it was only in the 1900s that we thought to pluralize the term and start speaking of priorities. What does it mean? What does it mean? Can we have 10 very first, absolutely first, before everything else things? Priorities? I mean, it would be funny, other than we hear this all the time. Have you ever been to a meeting? Hey, here are the 10 priorities. Huh? Haven't you? Haven't you been in those conversations? Of course you have. I was just listening to a new mayor was being interviewed. He said, oh, everyone is asking me, what are my top 3 priorities? What are my top 5 priorities? I'm going to tell you. And I am listening to this. You know, I'm driving along, I'm listening, like, what is it? He says, look, I have 24 priorities. And he adds, as if we hadn't missed the point, and not one of them is more important or less important than any other one. I'm driving down the road like this. No. This is a train wreck waiting to happen, where you end up making a millimeter progress in a million directions instead of actually doing something that matters. And it'd be all right, but it really matters that we actually do something about the big issues of our times. Don't we want leaders who can actually take on a problem and do something about it? But you can't do this if you're consumed in the logic and the nonsense of non-essentialism. The nonsense of nonsense. See, here's what happened, basically, in a nutshell, is that we've been conned. Yes. We have been sold a bill of goods. And the bill of goods is named this. If you can just fit it all in, you can have it all. That's it. That little simple idea has just been sold to us for the last 50 years in every imaginable way, through advertising, through media, through the people that we celebrate in Hollywood. You just fit everything in. You can have it all. And the only technical problem with that is it's not true. It's a lie. It's a complete fallacy. It's a myth. What does it produce? When we try to do it all, fit it all in, stuff it all into the overly stuffed closet of our lives, what do we get? Stress goes up, the quality of work goes down, etc. Stretched too thin, and all the rest of it we talked about. Exhausted. But let's just think about this idea of the closet for a moment, seeing that have found ourselves there. Think for a moment about your closet. I know about your closet. I know how it works. You never touch it, right? You never organize it. You never go through it and declutter it. But somehow, it stays pristinely ordered with just the things you love to wear and wear often. Yes? No, of course not. Now here's what really happens. You look at your closet and what you think is, I just need a larger closet. Until you get one. And then you realize that that's not the problem. That the person at both scenes of the crime is you. And the process goes this way. You go and take something off the shelf and you look at it and you think, I might be able to fit that again one day. Or maybe you say, it's going to come back into fashion. And what do you do with it? It goes back on the shelf. There is a term for this, psychological term. It's called the endowment effect. Endowment effect. What it means is that when we own something, we value it more than if we don't own it. I mean, that's terrific, right? Because this is why we want to buy our own houses, so we look after those houses. And this is why nobody in the history of the world has ever washed their own rental car. You don't own it, you don't clean it. That's your problem. Give it back. You take care of that. So it's a good thing. The endowment effect is a perfectly good thing unless or until it means that we overvalue something, overvalue an asset that we have simply because we own it. Right? This happens when you take that item of clothing off the shelf and should I keep it or not? And in the moment of evaluating it, you are more aware of your ownership and therefore overvalue it even beyond what you normally do. So this is why in the very moment of trying to give something away, it's the very hardest moment to do it, right? Some of you just had that, giving the money in your little envelope. Well, I do own it. It's mine. Do I give it? No, you all gave it. You were terrific. It was amazing. But here's the thing. We're not talking about closets, although at least one or two of you are going to go home and clean yours now. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the closet of your life. We're talking about all the options and opportunities, all the good things that come into your life, that because they are in your life, they're harder to get rid of. They're harder to evaluate properly. And so the thing to ask is not, do I value this thing in the closet or this opportunity that I have? The thing to ask is, if I didn't already have it, how much would I pay for it now? How hard would I work to go after this opportunity now? You've got to go back into a position where it isn't yours. It's like zero-based accounting, to start from scratch. Zero-based accounting, of course, somebody else can explain this better than me. The zero-based accounting basically, there's two ways of accounting. One is that you say, okay, well, last year we gave you X for your budget, and the company's grown by 5%, so we'll give you 4% extra in your budget now, and you just add based upon what you were doing last year, right? That's traditional how you allocate your budget. But zero-based accounting says it always goes to zero, and you have to justify everything. You might end up with twice what you had last year if it makes sense now, but you might end up with a lot less. But everything's justified from zero. I think this is better for our lives. If we want to break through to the next level, we have to practice zero-based accounting for our lives. Go back to the very beginning. If I didn't have any of the commitments I had right, if I wasn't doing any of these things, which would I select again? Which things would be truly meaningful to me? Which would be the most important? All right, now, back to the question that we've just been riffing on was, why is it, as the CEO of your life, you find yourself, stretched too thin, at work or at home. Why? I'm going to come down. Who is speaking? That was very strange. I could hear a voice. And the planning fallacy is what you said. Where did you read that in the book? No. In the book. And I wasn't making a case. I was just curious because I almost never hear anyone raise that term. It's the planning fallacy. But of course, it of course predates the book significantly. But the planning fallacy, right? This is a brain heuristic, which means you've got it in yours already. You're pre-programmed with this heuristic. And what it means is that you always believe, as humans, we believe things will take a shorter time than they really will take, even when we've done them before. Okay, so you're about to make a drive somewhere. You know it takes 15 minutes because you've made that drive 10 times. But you're on an email right now. And so what do you say to yourself? Well, I'm making it in 10. Today I'm going to make it in 10. No problem. And then, of course, you're 5 minutes late. Of course. Because you know it takes 15. This is the planning fallacy. Now, that's the small version of it. That's the small version, just a 10-minute thing here. But actually, it's got tremendously profound implications for the totality of our lives. Because actually, we believe we can do far more with the time we have remaining than we actually can. And this is why people end up taking on 20 different causes, 20 different pursuits, when really they can only just do one or two of them. If we really face the reality of this, we'd start to see it right up front, and we'd start to immediately become far more selective, extremely selective. In fact, we can predict with almost perfect certainty the level of plateauing in a person's ability to contribute based on one single item, and that is the selectivity of their criteria. As soon as you start saying yes to all of the opportunities and things that come to your life, as soon as that's what you're doing, that's the end. It will consume your time, it will consume your energy, and you'll do great work at that level. And you simply won't break through to the next level because there's no time with which to pursue those other things, to even explore the question, what would I do at the next level up? And in fact, I'll just put to you for a moment, we were talking about this last night, but I'll put this to you for a moment, that it's easier to go for a 10x jump in contribution, 10x level, than it is to go for 2 up, for doubling it. Why? Because if you just want to go for kind of 2x, then the logic starts to be, well, how do we do more of what I'm already doing? I'll just cram a bit more in and then I maybe approximate to that level. But if you go for 10x, you know you can't do it that way. You know you have to say, there's a different way to think about this problem. I've got to think differently. And that means I've got to create space to think differently. And that means, as I recommend, perhaps as the very one thing that one should do to become more of what we're talking about today, is to hold a personal quarterly offsite. Right, so everybody here could make the case for a quarterly offsite, can't you? Well, why don't you make it to me? What is the case for a quarterly offsite? Why should executives hold quarterly offsites? Tell me. Tell me. To get offsite.
Set priorities.
And then the answer here, said a little abashedly, to set priorities. I know you never know what to do with that word after this, do you? It's like you want to use it, but then you don't have a different word for it. All right? Why else do we do it? Why do we have a quarterly offsite at all? Get away and focus. I love this idea. We just want to be away. Depends what the work environment is that you're in, doesn't it? Okay? So you see the bigger picture. You want to think about, where you're headed, how we're doing against the long-term strategy, all of those things. Yes? So the answer to the question is, why don't we do it personally? Could we do it personally? Could every 90 days you take the time to evaluate basically 3 questions? And the questions are these. The first is, what is the one thing that if I focused on it would make the highest contribution for the rest of my life? The one thing. If I could only get one thing done for the rest of my whole life, what would that thing be? That's a big question, isn't it? That's an important question. Second question that you ask in your personal quarterly offsite is, okay, what's the next year then? What's the one biggest thing that I need to do over the next year? I'm not saying you'll only do one thing. That is not likely. It's not likely. But that's not the point. The point is to know what it is so you can start putting some resources behind it, some time to it, some energy to it. Maybe it's only 20% at first, but you keep investing. So you have your life goal, 1 year goal, and 90-day goal. That's it. I say that's it like it's easy. And I tell you, that's about as hard a work as there is in the whole wide world to get that clarity. I think it's 10 times harder to get it, but 100 times more valuable once you do. Because suddenly, everything else can be filtered through that criteria. You have the selective criteria with which to determine whether something is essential or whether it's trivial. Does it make sense? All right. Back to the same question. Question is, why, as the CEO of your life, do you find yourself allocating resources in a way that leave you stretched too thin at work or at home? Or in your strategy at work, where you're trying to do too many things? Why? Good. A dysfunctional sense of responsibility. Snap if you know exactly what is being talked about here. Dysfunctional. Why don't you tell us a lot more about that? I'm going to take the mic off. Well, I'll try. You got more than you bargained for, didn't you? Nobody's going to want to comment after this.
So feeling if it's not you, then there's no one else that will do it. So you feel like every ball that you see on the floor, you've got to pick up.
Thank you. You see a ball on the floor, you have to pick it up. Do you feel that sometimes? Good people have to do it all. If it's a good thing, you must do it. If somebody else isn't going to do it, you have to be the one to do it. Now, of course, we believe in a sense of responsibility. And I'm not advocating for not feeling a sense of responsibility. I'm advocating, in support of what you're saying, that we pursue that our responsibility is to our highest and best use. And that it isn't enough to simply do 20 different good things. No, we have to do better than that, discern more than that. We have to figure out the thing that will make the highest contribution. Doesn't that make sense? Does it make sense? Why else? Why do you get pulled into this? I don't think it's a trivial question. Because here's the reality, is that people end up, let's go personal for a moment. People end up, at the end of their lives, with regrets. Yes? Like we have a lot of data on this, because a lot of people have died. And a lot of those people talked to someone else before they did and told them what they felt about their lives. And somebody tried to gather some of that data together, in fact, wrote a piece called The 5 Regrets of the Dying. Have you read it? You've seen it, 5 Regrets of the Dying. You know what the number one regret was? Number one regret. Oh, it was number 2. We'll get to that in a second. Number one regret is that they didn't live a life true to what was essential within them, but to what other people all around them expected of them. Number one regret of the dying. Number 2 regret was spending too much time at work, not enough time with family, right? Because however important your clients are, they just don't come to your deathbed. So it's a pretty good test of whether somebody is essential or just the good part of your life. Will they be there then? Will they care enough to be there? Would they be part of that inner circle? Now, those are the 2 regrets. There's more, of course, but let's start with those 2. The thing that's interesting to me about that is that nobody ever set a goal to achieve that, right? No one ever said, well, my goal in life is to just make sure that I spend my life doing everything everyone else expects of me, but not the thing that's actually essential and I feel driven to do. That's what I want. Right, so that means that everybody that has that regret got there accidentally. That they were pursuing a strategy they did not mean to pursue. Does that make sense? That our strategy is not what we say it is, but what we do. Does that make sense? So, if we're going to go personal, and by the way, the reason I want to go personal is because it's the fastest way to learn how to be what we're talking about today, how to become an essentialist. Because if you think it matters personally, if you think this subject is one for your life, then you'll also learn to apply it to business and to contribution outside of your own life. But that's where we need to start. And I learned this a few years ago, a while back. when I have 4 children, and I know it's not very essentialist of me. And if you had to get rid of one, which would you get rid of? I know the answer. Just don't share it with anybody. And my boss at the time emailed me and said, hey, Friday would be a very bad time to have a baby. Yeah. And my wife was pregnant at the time, otherwise it would have been even weirder. But it was pretty weird anyway. The due date was Friday, and sure enough, Friday came along, and this is, one of our daughters was born. I was in the hospital with her. But instead of being able to be focused on what was important now, right, I was trying to straddle it. I was trying to do both. Could I somehow, keep my wife happy, everything's okay, they're looking all right, the baby's okay, maybe I can somehow go to the meeting too, right? I'll just do both, right? And but then I thought, oh, come on, you know what's important. So with all the conviction I could muster, I said, yes. And I went. As I remember it, my boss picked me up from the hospital and took me to the appointment. And afterwards said to me as we left the meeting, the client will respect you for the choice you made. I don't know if they did. Their faces did not evince that kind of confidence. But even if they had, surely I had made a fool's bargain. Surely I had fallen prey to the basic assumption of everythingism, which says I can do both. That's the answer to every trade-off. Let's just do both. It's the kind of thing that happens in meetings. When you're in a meeting and you have a point of view and somebody else has a totally different point of view, and now you're at the beginning of what could make a super great strategy conversation about what's important and what's not important, which thing is first and then somebody else, strained by the conflict, says, I think we're all saying the same thing. Or the other one-liner, for which I am yet to see a thing happen from. Let's take it offline. To the mysterious world of offline, important, critical conversations that we're not having in this meeting where we ought to be having them. So I was trying to straddle it in just that same sort of way. And somebody asked me about this. They said, what did your wife think about this? And I said, well, my second wife thinks it's really bad. No, I still have my first wife, Anna, and amazing she is. What had happened? That was the thing. I've reflected on it so many times since. How was it possible that drip by drip I'd given up that kind of control? How was it possible that I thought this would be a reasonable decision to make? A reasonable trade-off. I can just do both. And I'll just let this other person control my life to such a degree that I'll think they get a vote on the question of what I should be doing the day of my wife's birth. How I got so far. What I learned from the experience, I feel like this one can be written, chiseled in stone, or even in the fleshy tables of our heart. If you don't prioritize your life, someone else will. Yeah? It's not about just making a list and prioritizing it. It's about the courage to negotiate with other people who have influence in your life about the thing that really matters. Let me tell you about somebody who heard that story and made a different choice because of it that inspires me still. This is someone who had never said no to their boss in their whole life. 5 years they'd worked for the boss. Pretty good relationship, always willing to help and so on. And then she heard this story and she said, okay, so my wedding's coming up and I'm going to take 5 days completely off work to focus on and that isn't very long anyway, is it? 5 days for a wedding. It depends what kind of wedding they were trying to put on. Some of these things need to be 5 months, but she took 5 days, committed to it, negotiated with the boss. The boss, you need to do this work before you leave. She did that work ahead of time, great work, everything. She enters the 5 days, and then the boss calls her up. I'm so sorry. Someone dropped the ball, and I need you to pick it up. In the past, she says, every time I would have just, said yes. And she said, look, we negotiated this. I did the work. I'm sorry this will be frustrating for you. The answer is no. Felt empowered by it. Her boss was not particularly happy, actually. Came back later and had to do the work herself because everyone else on the team had really dropped the ball. And she said, I realized when you said no, I wasn't happy, but I realized I'm not being fair about it with the group right now. I always come to you because I know you'll do it. I need to have a conversation with the whole group. So it turned out, in that sense, to be positive. But more important than that is that the next 5 days she spent totally focused on her wedding and was so touched herself by what she'd learned that she put it in her vows. I will essentialize this marriage, this relationship, over all others. I thought that was pretty fantastic. To understand its trade-offs. Life is trade-offs, and we need to make them. Now, the only thing really I want to sort of add to this conversation, and then maybe we can do some, question and answer or something, is that the whole idea of essentialism is not adding one more thing into your already overstuffed life, right? And like people say to me, oh yeah, priority setting, yeah, that's important too. And I'm always like, no, it's not one more thing. It's the thing. It's the very work of your life, especially in today's hyper-connected environment. And by hyper-connected, by the way, what I mean very concretely is email on your phone. Put your hand up if you have email on your phone. Of course you do. That's a monopoly view right now. Everybody. And why do you have it on your phones? Tell me. We all know. We've all been sold it. Why? What's that? Available. It's what? We might miss something. It's the fear of missing out. FOMO. We just have to learn instead the joy of missing out. Or JOMO. I don't know how we got onto the email thing. I think I saw someone checking their email, which kind of got my blood boiling or something like that. Because here's the thing, right? This is a perfect example of how we've been conned. And we've been told that this is a productivity tool. Have email on your phone as a productivity tool, right? It is not a productivity tool. It is not. And here's how you know, because if you have to be really productive, man, if you have to get something done, you turn your phone off. You go somewhere where there isn't internet, like on a plane, until they put Wi-Fi there, and that was a sad day. I've been mourning that day ever since. Why did you do it? There was only one good place to do any work anymore. You took it away, all for your $12.99. Go. Terrible. You've got to create space. You've got to create space. There's somebody who got the idea of essentialism. It's not one more thing. It's something you become, something you have to be, an essentialist. And the reason we have to be it is because the environment we're in requires this particular kind of leadership. This is the environment we are in. Perpetual distraction, social media, smartphones, wearables. This is our world. Facebook, where everybody just lies about their life. And we, gullible we, believe them and compare ourselves against the very, very best of everybody else's life all the time. It's terrible. Makes us feel, psychologically ill. It's, a scientific fact. And we just keep doing it. Mark Zuckerberg will answer for a lot in the next life. There's somebody who I think really epitomized this, understood this. Another lawyer in England who actually went all the way to become a barrister and might have stayed a barrister unless he had a family issue that came up in South Africa. And so he left. He bought first-class tickets to ride on the train all across Africa. Worked perfectly well until he got to South Africa. But he was kicked off the train because he was Indian and you're not allowed to. It was in the middle of apartheid still. You're not allowed to ride on the train. So he gets literally thrown off. And suddenly he goes, no, this is pretty important. I need to pay attention to this, and I'm going to fight this. He takes on the South African government for the next few years and wins. Has to go to jail on the way. I mean, he sacrificed a significant price to be able to do this, and he wins. And so then he goes back to India. And by the time he's got back to India, to his surprise, people already know about him, already know about having taken on a big, mighty government. And at the time, of course, India was taking on a big, mighty government that was also a little bit oppressive. Sorry about that. It's Britain. And they said, look, you've just got to run for office. We need you to run as prime minister. And a non-essentialist would have said yes, I think. Well, that's a good opportunity, and they want me to do it, so why not give in to that? He says, no, I have to go and listen to India. I have to go and find what's really going on, what's essential, what's not. I must do that. And he doesn't do it as like some political stunt for 2 weeks listening to India, showing that you're now savvy and aware of the area, as we sometimes see in today's political environment. No, he goes for a whole year listening to India. And this is how we know he was listening, because he learned something so surprising. And the question he was asking is, how is it so possible that so many people, 300 million at the time, could be controlled by so few British? How's it possible? And he answered this to his surprise. It was something tiny but essential: salt. They controlled the supply of salt. You weren't allowed to make salt in India. And if you can't make salt, you can't make bread. If you can't make bread, you can't control your food chain correctly. And so this was it. This simple idea had controlled it. This is where he had the idea to have the salt marches. And he walked across India in a demonstration against the British to make salt on the beaches, and 600,000 Indians followed him in a demonstration that caught the British attention. And then through a series of fasting and prayer, brought at the time the greatest empire the world had ever known to its knees. He was an essentialist. For 3 years, he didn't read a newspaper at one time, just because it was too noisy, like turning off his Twitter feed. For a year, he didn't speak 1 day a week so he could listen better. When his grandson was beaten up twice, once for being too black and then once for being too white, that's going to make you angry. And it did. They sent him to live with him, and he spent an hour a day for a year and a half listening to him, because that was essential. He'd learned in a way from some of the mistakes he'd made with his own children where he'd been too busy. He became an essentialist. Left his life, at the end of his life, had 10 items to his name. Glasses, 1, clothes, 2. Had nothing left. Didn't need it. Because he was consumed, utterly consumed with the purpose of his life, which was to bring independence to the Indian people, which he did. Still the largest democracy in the world, 1.1, 1.2 billion people now. When he died, the U.S. Secretary of State, George C. Marshall, said of him, "This little brown man showed that simplicity and truth was more powerful than empires and armies." And Einstein said of him, "Generations to come will scarce believe that such a one as this ever in flesh and blood walked upon this earth." That is the power of being an essentialist. We don't have to be Gandhi, of course, but we have to find our own purpose, 10x purpose, the thing that is essential, that matters. And it's so important we'd be willing to give up everything else to achieve it. And then we can make a great contribution. Well, snap with me. Life is fast and full of opportunity, yes? And the complication is we've been conned. We think we have to do everything sometimes. And the impact of that is we can plateau in our progress. Snap for that. My position is we can make a different choice. My position is that we can learn to become essentialists in our lives. And my position is that at the end of our lives, or on Judgment Day, we may regret many things, but we are not going to regret the day we chose to become an essentialist. I just wish I'd focused on all the non-essential, trivial stuff instead of the thing that really mattered most. I wish. We're not going to regret that. And so I say to you, on that day, what will you hope that you chose to do on this one? Thank you very much.
Greg McEwen. Thank you, Greg. By the way, my personal question is, your wife is a Broadway singer, correct? Toured the national tour of Beauty and the Beast, playing Belle, correct? It's all true. Is that amazing?
Beauty and the Beast.
Beauty and the Beast. let's do a little drawing, and then we'll send you on your way. And by the way,